Good evening, and welcome back to Farcical Fears. On a freezing November night in 1888, the streets of Victorian London felt silent, as news spread of a discovery so disturbing that even the most hardened police inspectors refused to speak of it. A woman's body had been found in a locked room on the third floor of a boarding house on Dorset Street. But what made seasoned detectives turn pale wasn't just the brutality of her death. It was the fact that every door and window was bolted from the inside, and she had been alone for 3 days. The landlady swore no one had entered or left. The neighbors heard nothing but a single scream at exactly midnight. When investigators finally broke down the door, they found something that defied all logic and reason, something so inexplicable that the case file was sealed for over a century. What they discovered in that room challenged everything they knew about murder, and to this day, no one has been able to explain how it was physically possible. This is the story of the Dorset Street locked room mystery, and what you're about to hear will make you question everything you thought you knew about the impossible. If you're new here, this is where we uncover the darkest corners of history that time tried to bury. Subscribe now for true horror stories that will haunt you long after the video ends. Hit that notification bell, because when the past calls, you don't want to miss it. November 1888 was already a month soaked in blood and terror for the people of Victorian London. The East End was gripped by fear as Jack the Ripper stalked the fog-laden streets. But what happened on Dorset Street on the night of November 17th was something entirely different. Something that would perplex investigators in ways the Ripper never could. This wasn't just another murder in London's most dangerous neighborhood. This was an impossibility made flesh. Catherine Morrow was a seamstress, 34 years old, who had taken a small room on the third floor of Mrs. Adelaide Turner's boarding house at number 42 Dorset Street. She was known as a quiet woman, kept to herself, paid her rent on time, and was never seen with visitors. Mrs. Turner would later tell police that Catherine seemed frightened in the days leading up to her death, constantly glancing over her shoulder, jumping at shadows, and requesting that her door lock be reinforced with an additional bolt. When Mrs. Turner asked what troubled her, Catherine only whispered that she had seen something she shouldn't have, something that belonged to the darkness. On the evening of November 14th, Catherine climbed the narrow stairs to her room at 8:30, carrying a basket of mending work and a small loaf of bread. Mrs. Turner heard the distinct sound of not one, but 2 bolts sliding into place, followed by the scrape of something heavy being pushed against the door. The window shutters on the third floor were always kept closed and latched from the inside due to the bitter November cold, and Catherine was known to be meticulous about securing them. This would become crucial later. At exactly midnight, a scream pierced the night, a sound so raw and filled with such primal terror that it woke everyone in the boarding house and several neighbors on the street. Mrs. Turner and 2 other residents rushed to Catherine's door and pounded on it, calling her name. There was no response. They pressed their ears to the wood and heard nothing. No movement, no breathing. Only an oppressive silence that seemed to radiate cold. Mr. Davies, a dock worker who lived on the second floor, tried to force the door but found it impossible. Both bolts were firmly in place from the inside, and something heavy was clearly blocking it. The police were summoned immediately, but Catherine's room would remain sealed for 3 full days. This wasn't negligence, it was confusion. Inspector Harold Greenwood, who arrived at dawn on November 15th, faced a puzzle that defied his 20 years of experience. The door was bolted from within. The window, when examined from the street with a ladder, showed shutters that were closed and latched from the inside, with no signs of tampering. There was no other entrance to the room, no adjoining door, no attic access, no loose floorboards. The building's architecture was simple and solid. How could someone murder a woman in a completely sealed room and then vanish? For 3 days, police theorized and argued. Some suggested Catherine had taken her own life, but the scream suggested otherwise. It was a scream of terror at something external, not internal despair. Others wondered if she had suffered some medical emergency, a stroke or heart failure that made her cry out. But that wouldn't explain the sense of dread that permeated the hallway outside her room, a coldness that made hardened constables hesitate before approaching the door. Mrs. Turner insisted the temperature near Catherine's door was at least 20 degrees colder than the rest of the house, and your breath misted in the air even though the hallway had heating. On November 17th, with the smell beginning to seep under the door, Inspector Greenwood made the decision to break it down. It took 4 men with a battering ram nearly an hour to splinter the thick oak. When they finally broke through, they found a wardrobe had been pushed against the door from the inside. Not dragged, but pushed with such force that it had gouged deep scratches into the floorboards. Both bolts were still in the locked position when the door gave way. What they found inside the room would haunt every man present for the rest of their lives. Catherine Morrow sat upright in a chair facing the door, fully dressed in her nightgown, her hands gripping the armrests so tightly that her fingers had broken and splintered the wood. Her face was frozen in an expression of absolute horror, eyes wide open, mouth stretched in a silent scream. But it was the state of the room that defied explanation. Every piece of furniture except the chair she sat in and the wardrobe against the door had been destroyed. Not just broken, but systematically torn apart as if by immense strength. The bed frame was splintered into kindling. Her sewing table had been reduced to splinters. Even the iron poker from the fireplace had been bent nearly in half. The window shutters were still latched from the inside, untouched. There was no weapon in the room, no sign of a struggle with another person, yet Catherine's death was clearly not natural. The medical examiner, Dr. Edmund Price, documented that she had died of what he could only describe as extreme shock. Her heart had simply stopped from fear. But there were marks on her body that made no medical sense. Around her neck were pressure marks, as if she had been strangled, but the pattern didn't match human hands. The marks were too wide, the spacing between the impressions too irregular. Dr. Price wrote in his report that it looked as if she had been gripped by something with fingers twice the length of a normal human hand. But the detail that made Inspector Greenwood order the case file sealed was what they found, written on the wall behind the door, hidden until they had fully entered the room. In what appeared to be charcoal, someone, or something, had written the same phrase over and over, covering the entire wall from floor to ceiling in increasingly frantic handwriting. It came through the mirror. It came through the mirror. It came through the mirror. The writing started neat and controlled at the top, but descended into barely legible scratches near the floor, as if whoever wrote it had collapsed while writing. The handwriting matched Catherine's own hand from samples of her sewing labels. When investigators examined the room more carefully, they discovered fragments of a mirror scattered across the floor near the far wall. The frame still hung there, empty, with shards of silvered glass ground into powder beneath it, as if someone had taken a hammer to it repeatedly. Mrs. Turner confirmed that Catherine had a full-length standing mirror in that exact spot. She had seen it many times when collecting rent, but now it was destroyed so completely that not a single piece larger than a fingernail remained intact. The wooden frame showed scratches on the inside, deep gouges that ran from the center outward, as if something had clawed its way out from behind where the glass had been. Inspector Greenwood interviewed every resident of the boarding house and every neighbor on Dorset Street. No one had entered the building that night, except those who already lived there. No one had seen strangers in the area. The scream had been heard by at least 15 people, all of whom confirmed it came exactly at midnight and lasted no more than 5 seconds before cutting off abruptly. Several witnesses mentioned that immediately after the scream, they heard what sounded like furniture being destroyed, a violent crashing and splintering that went on for nearly a minute before falling silent. The investigation took a darker turn when police discovered Catherine's background. She had worked as a seamstress for various wealthy families across London, but 3 weeks before her death, she had been dismissed from a position at the home of occultist and collector, Lord Edmund Ashford. The reason for her dismissal was never made official, but a housemaid at the Ashford estate told police that Catherine had accidentally broken a mirror in Lord Ashford's private study, an antique mirror he claimed dated back to the 1600s and was part of a collection of items with supposed supernatural properties. Lord Ashford had been furious, ranting that Catherine had no idea what she had unleashed, that the mirror had been sealed for a reason, and that she would pay for her carelessness. When police attempted to interview Lord Ashford, they found his estate abandoned. He had left London the same night Catherine died, and no forwarding address was ever found. His staff had been dismissed with generous severations and strict instructions never to speak of what happened in that house. The mirror Catherine had broken was gone, and no records of its origin or purpose existed in Lord Ashford's remaining papers. It was as if he had deliberately erased every trace of it. The case was officially closed in December 1888, with the conclusion that Catherine Morrow had died of natural causes brought on by extreme fear, possibly from a mental breakdown. The destroyed furniture was attributed to her own actions in a state of delirium, though no medical expert could explain how a woman of her size could have generated the force necessary to destroy iron and oak so completely. The writing on the wall was dismissed as the ravings of a disturbed mind. The strange marks on her neck were noted, but never explained. The case file was sealed and marked as resolved, buried in the archives of Scotland Yard. But the story didn't end there. In 1923, during renovations of the Dorset Street boarding house before its demolition, workers discovered something that had been hidden beneath the floorboards of Catherine's room. It was a journal, written in her hand, dated from the 3 days before her death. The entries were brief, but increasingly frantic. She wrote that after breaking Lord Ashford's mirror, she had begun seeing things in reflective surfaces, a figure standing behind her that vanished when she turned around. She wrote that it was getting closer each time she saw it, that it was learning how to exist on this side. Her final entry, dated November 14th, the day she locked herself in her room, simply read, "It knows where I live. It's been watching through every mirror. I destroyed them all except one. God forgive me, I thought I could trap it, but I only gave it a doorway. If you're reading this, don't look in mirrors after midnight. Don't let it see you seeing it." That's how it comes through. The journal was logged into evidence, but never made public. It remains in the Scotland Yard archives to this day, filed under case number 1888 DOR 47, accessible only with special permission that is rarely granted. The few researchers who have read it report that the final pages contain sketches, rough drawings of a figure with impossibly long limbs and fingers, a face that is simultaneously blank and terrible, standing just behind the viewer's reflection. The sketches become more detailed with each page, as if Catherine was documenting something that was becoming more real, more solid, the more she acknowledged it. Dorset Street itself no longer exists. It was demolished in the 1920s as part of East End slum clearance, and modern buildings now occupy the space where number 42 once stood. But there are reports, even today, from people who work in the offices built on that ground. They speak of cold spots that appear without explanation, of mirrors that crack spontaneously, of the feeling of being watched from reflections that show nothing but your own image. And sometimes, late at night when the building is empty, security guards report hearing a sound that echoes through the walls, A woman's scream, cut short at exactly midnight, followed by the distant sound of something clawing and splintering, trying desperately to break through from the other side. The Dorset Street locked room mystery remains one of Victorian London's most disturbing unsolved cases. Not because we don't know how Catherine Morrow died. The evidence is clear that she died of shock, but because we can never know what she saw in those final moments that was terrible enough to stop her heart. What came through the mirror that November night in 1888? What did Lord Ashford know about that antique glass that made him flee London forever? And most disturbing of all, if Catherine destroyed every mirror in her room except one, and that one was shattered into powder, does that mean whatever came through is still trapped on this side, walking among us, waiting for another mirror, another midnight, another person who looks just a moment too long at their own reflection? Some doors, once opened, can never be closed. Some mirrors, once broken, reveal more than just glass. And some mysteries are better left unsolved, because the truth is far more terrifying than any explanation we could accept. This was the Dorset Street locked room mystery, a case that proves sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is look into the darkness and have it look back. Sweet dreams.